The breakdown of our shared reality due to a profit motive in which personalization is profitable. This is really important and subtle to get. I mean, it's sort of obvious once you see it, but giving each person their own Truman Show reality is more profitable and better at keeping your attention glued than to creating shared realities that are not personalized. A personalized Twitter with a personalized algorithmically curated newsfeed is going to outcompete a chronological Twitter that just shows you tweets showing up on whatever level they do. So it really becomes this race to hyper personalize, which then this race to narrow each of our individual construction of reality. And I think that is actually the deepest harm that I like to focus on these days, because that's really what we're seeing. I think in January 6th, we're seeing it in the country, we're seeing it around the world. We do not have a shared basis of ground reality. I know you talked to our mutual friend Daniel Schmachtenberger about some of these topics, but I think that is the kind of shared problem statement that we're now left with. I sometimes think of it, Brett, to sort of play with metaphors that you are and Heather are talking about, that we now have a few different problems. We have a technological problem of how social media's business models and fundamental design and virality and the kind of hijacking of all of our different evolutionary impulses causes all these sort of, cultural fallout, this kind of cultural externalities of shortening of attention spans, mental health problems of kids, et cetera, and this breakdown of reality. But now we have a cultural set of problems. The problem is metastasized. So now if you took technology away, our minds are all running, not that they were never not running malware, but they're running much worse malware than they would have ever run before, and it's been exacerbated. So I think of it kind of like we had the Zuckerberg Institute of Virology, and that institute was doing gain of function research on mimetics, on what kinds of mimetic viruses would work. And they were literally having engineers tweak things like, the newsfeed recommendations, what kind of things would keep people clicking more. And they started hyper evolving in a certain pathway, in the same way that gain of function, I guess, research kind of works. They were also tweaking the friend recommendation systems to say, which friends could we recommend for you to add that would cause you to stay on the product longer, and more friends like you, more like-minded friends, more QAnon friends if you start off in QAnon, more Wokistan friends if you start off in Wokistan, more Magistan friends if you start off in Magistan. That will increase people's sort of tribal affiliations. Then they were doing gain of function research on Facebook groups. What groups could we recommend you to join? And we now know from Facebook's own internal documents that 64% of the extremist groups that people joined were due to Facebook's own recommendation systems. In other words, this was not a user who's going into Facebook and being like, what group, what sewing club, what book club do I want to join? What DarkHorse podcast discussion group do I want to join? Instead, they're being recommended something. And my friend Renee DiResta, who's sort of a researcher on these topics, says it really perfectly. When she was a new mom, she joined an organic baby food moms group, like where you make your own baby food, sort of a natural thing you might want to do. But what was the most recommended group, do you think, for the new organic baby food moms from Facebook's point of view? What would keep people, what would keep users who looked like organic do-it-yourself baby food moms on the site the longest, if you're just building a naive AI recommendation system?
I am frightened to guess for many reasons. I'm going to resist guessing, because I will tell you if I'm right here in a second. You tell me what it was.
I mean, it's not maybe that surprising that it was more of the anti-vaccine moms groups, right?
Because that is exactly what I was going to guess. And I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to add fuel to the fire.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so and then once you joined that group, then Facebook said, what do the anti-vaccine moms groups, what do they tend to click on most? What keeps them around the most? And it recommended Pizzagate and chemtrails and other things like that. Now, when I say this, I might sound like a blue church left person who's saying, all these conspiracy theories and all these sort of hesitations that people would have are somehow naively informed, as opposed to there's a pre-trans fallacy for each of these different sort of concepts. And I want to make sure that we're caveating that. But when you understand that this gain of function research, Zuckerberg Institute of Virology, was doing this research that was hyper accelerating these kinds of evolved pathways, and now that mimetic virus, that sort of reality dividing virus, that extremifying reality virus, left the Zuckerberg Institute of Virology in Menlo Park and actually escaped into the world, and it actually has shut down the global sense-making ecology. It is now, just in the same way that COVID has shut down the global economy, I think that this mimetic virus has shut down our ability to see reality in shared ways. And I think that's really the problem, is how do we not just deal with the pandemic, but how do we deal with the kind of reality breakdown pandemic? And how do we have not just like reality bridging conversations, but really what is the solution to that? And I think we're all trying to figure that out.
All right, I want to slow down a little bit, because it happens that you have landed just like a millimeter away from the topic I was going to introduce here and get your thinking on it. So I know we're very close to the same page here. But one of the things that I think is most difficult to convey is that there is a natural synergistic relationship between human consciousness and creativity and evolutionary dynamics that we are unaware are taking place. And so I think we have, there's a dichotomy, a false one, where people expect AI to take off and come for us, but they also intuitively know that that can't be where we are, because all of the devices that are supposed to be intelligent are way stupider than they should be, right? So we sort of know that we've got some time before AI gets to that place. However, what we don't intuit is that humans can partner with semi-artificially intelligent or narrowly artificially intelligent or even just learning algorithms. And they can do the part that the artificial entities can't do themselves, right? So you have a bunch of people inside Facebook thinking about how to enhance Facebook's financial well-being, right? Just increase shareholder value at this point. And they can narrow the search space of possible functional strategies to a very small canvas. And then things like A/B testing can do the heavy lifting, which is, incidentally, you've landed on the perfect analogy. It is exactly gain-of-function research, because what gain-of-function research does, or not all of it, but the part of it that is called serial passaging involves taking a natural entity, or a largely natural entity, or a composite of natural entities, and placing it in an environment so that evolution can do the stuff we don't yet know how to do, right? If we could do it directly, we would. But we can't. So what we do is we just put it through an accelerated process of evolution. We basically reduce the noise and increase the signal, and then we take what comes out the other side and we discover what we didn't know enough to desire. So that is exactly what will happen here. But imagine, you could have had 1,000 Facebooks, right? 1,000 hopeful companies starting out trying to capture this space. And selection would have found the ones that happened to have the right things to keep attention on their site, right? To direct people to stuff that would reinforce their biases, etc. Those companies would have risen to the surface. Instead, we had a couple of Facebook-like entities, but we had intelligent people within them looking for mechanisms. How does Facebook get ahead of MySpace, right?
Yeah.
And that has been like a cyborg, where you have a partially undirected process of evolution and partially human creativity fused together to discover defects in all of our cognition that allow them to steer us into behavior that we otherwise wouldn't be involved in. And, it is, I think the thing is, if you understand that this isn't wholly dependent on an evolutionary process that is haphazard, nor is it wholly dependent on a conspiracy in which people simply sideline human well-being and go for broke, but the two things can partner, it would be hard to overrate the danger of that. And what you've been saying forever is effectively it's here, and we don't actually know the full range of hazards that emerge from it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, because I don't get to talk to evolutionary theorists where we can really go deep into each of the sub aspects of this problem. The first thing you talked about was this sort of projecting into the future. We often look into the future and say, when is AI going to take over humanity? And we think about the singularity. You think about numbers like 2050, 2060. You think about super intelligence, Nick Bostrom. You think about AI taking our jobs. But there's this much earlier point that you've made, I know, ages ago in your work. I remember you and Eric Weinstein, both your brother Eric, talking about this, more like the accession point, that technology doesn't actually overwhelm human strengths, it undermines human evolutionary weaknesses. And there's this sort of takeover point. And by the way, that point for me is more informed by my training in magic. Actually, since the house burned down, I've been buying back all my sort of magic supplies. I have all this sort of these packages arriving with these kind of interesting magic goodies. And the interesting thing about magic is it's based on an asymmetry of understanding, where the magician essentially does know something about an evolutionary weakness in your mind that you do not know about yourself. And it's that asymmetry of information that allows the illusion to work. And the problem is that technology has become this sort of 24/7 hyper asymmetric magic trick, but we don't perceive it that way because we're enjoying so many things from it. We enjoy social validation and approval. We enjoy getting, variable schedule reward slot machine type things. We enjoy photo filters that make us look more attractive briefly. But these are all essentially exploits, maladaptive, depending on how you see it, exploits on key evolutionary weaknesses. And it's really a race. This is where the race to the bottom of the brainstem, it's a race to the deepest evolutionary weaknesses, or as your brother has said, a race to create a backdoor to the human soul, to figure out and reverse engineer whatever we would call sort of a dimensionality of free will, to turn more and more of those dimensions into predictable outcomes, meaning less and less free and more commoditized dead slabs of human behavior. It's really important to get this, because I think if you go back, and like you said, it's not a conscious intention by Facebook or Twitter to try to ruin the world or to profit greed at all cost. I think a lot of this was incremental decisions in an evolutionary environment where they're competing for attention. I actually remember, because a lot of our insights about this work come from knowing the people who built these products. I was friends with the founders of Instagram. I was at South by Southwest in 2009 when Facebook was competing with Twitter for who's going to create the news feed, and they're both competing for that chronological kind of instant news feed of people posting things really often and having it feel more alive and more rapid. And a news feed that's giving you new things constantly is going to outcompete a news feed that only has new things once every 5 hours, right? Because there's a freshness to it. So in each case, and I hope we go more into this, the race to capture attention led to all sorts of decisions being made that were based on the evolutionary fitness of attention grabbing machines, but not for the evolutionary fitness of a societal cohesion or a societal intelligence. Because what I really worry about is that the net result of all of this is when you don't have a shared reality or an ability to agree on reality, or you have such emotional grievances and resentments because you've seen infinite evidence of hypocrisy and awful things the other side has done, that you do not want to you don't even want to have a conversation about what you could agree about and what you can do about any existential problem, whether it's climate change, et cetera, that have shrinking timelines. So when you kind of add this all together, the question I'm always asking is, what is an attention economy? What is a digital environment? What is the cyborg-like fusion of the man-machine, human-machine interface that leads to a smarter, democratic, plural, collective psyche, but is making better and better choices together? And I think because we have limited time on various problems, especially climate change, that's the real question that I kind of land on. But we probably should reverse engineer a little bit more of how we got here with the evolutionary hacking of tech.
Sweet. Now, unfortunately, when I talk to you and a few others, each little soliloquy opens up 10, 12 hours worth of topics that we could cover. And so there's a bunch of stuff I want to recover here, and I'm sure we're going to miss some important things.
Let's make sure we try to capture a lot of it, though, because I think it's going to be good to flesh out.
Yeah, I think it's really important stuff. One has to do with magic, and I wanted to point to something that you didn't exactly say, but I'm pretty sure you'll agree with. The thing that's really fascinating about magic, it's not so surprising, for reasons we can come back to, that human perception has blind spots and defects that can be exploited, right? But there's a big difference between running into a con artist who you don't know is a con artist, who is attempting to exploit those things for their gain, and a magician where you go and the person says, hey, I'm a magician, I do magic, and you know damn well they don't do magic, right? But the point is, you are constantly at a good magic show trying to figure out how it's being done and unable to, right? Mm-hmm. And so the point is, the fact that you're aware of what's going on at Facebook, Twitter, etc., is no protection. And this is one of the things that I think is most telling is that the very people who constructed these things, the smart ones, are aware that they are not in control, that when they are the users, they're as vulnerable as anybody else. And, the fact that they very often have very strong limits for their own children's interaction with these things tells us what we're dealing with. We're dealing with something so potent that the awareness that it is happening is no protection.